cloaked shadow slips through the fog, scaling the ancient spire of St. Mary's Church, hiding a deadly secret that could unravel a village. Welcome to Miss Marple and the Shadow in the Spire, a mystery that will grip you. Take a seat, sip your tea, and dive in. If you love the suspense, subscribe. Your support means everything. Chapter 1. The Arrival in St. Mary's Hollow. The village of St. Mary's Hollow lay cradled in the gentle folds of England's countryside, its cobblestone lanes weaving past thatched cottages, where roses climbed weathered walls, and the air carried the sweet scent of baking bread. It was October 1952, and the golden light of autumn bathed the rolling hills, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets older than the oaks lining the village green. The annual harvest festival was fast approaching, and the villagers bustled with preparations, stringing lanterns, baking pies, and rehearsing folk songs. Yet beneath this idyllic bustle, a thread of unease ran through St. Mary's Hollow, centred on the ancient spire of St. Mary's Church, where whispers of a mysterious shadow had begun to stir fear in even the stoutest hearts. Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster from St. Mary Mead, stepped off the afternoon train at the village's tiny station, her sharp blue eyes scanning the platform through her spectacles. In her 70s, with snowy hair neatly pinned beneath a sensible felt hat and a knitting bag slung over one arm, she looked every inch the harmless auntie. But those who knew her understood that her unassuming demeanour masked a mind as keen as a razor, honed by years of observing the quiet dramas of village life, dramas that often mirrored the darkest corners of human nature. She had come at the urging of her old friend, Lady Eleanor Hargrove, whose letter had arrived a week prior, its elegant script hinting at trouble. "My dear Jane," it read, "the village is alive with festival plans, but there's a shadow over us. Quite literally, I fear. Your insight would be a comfort." Miss Marple, never one to resist a mystery, had packed her modest suitcase and boarded the train without delay. A young porter, Tommy Jenkins, greeted her with a nervous grin, his freckled face flushed as he hefted her small case. "Welcome to St. Mary's Hollow, ma'am," he said, his voice betraying a slight quiver. "Lady Hargrove sent me to fetch you." His hands fumbled with the suitcase, and Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted toward the distant church spire, its weathered stone piercing the sky like a silent sentinel. As they climbed into a pony trap, the horse snorting softly, Tommy's chatter filled the crisp air. "The festival's the talk of the village, ma'am. Cider, dancing, games, best time of the year. But folks are jumpy lately, what with the shadow up at the church." Miss Marple's knitting needles, already in motion, paused briefly. "A shadow, you say? Do tell me more." Tommy leaned closer, his voice dropping despite the empty lane. "Seen at dusk, it is, climbing the spire like a cat. Mrs. Pritchett swears it's a ghost, but I reckon it's someone up to no good. Last week the church bell rang at midnight and no one was at the ropes." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Ghosts, in her experience, were often flesh and blood, with motives as earthly as greed or spite. The trap rattled along the winding road to Hargrove Manor, a grand Georgian house with ivy-draped walls and windows that gleamed like polished jewels. Lady Eleanor greeted her at the door, her silver-streaked hair swept into an elegant chignon, her pearls catching the light. "Jane, you're a sight for sore eyes," she exclaimed, enveloping her friend in a warm embrace. They settled into the drawing room, where a fire crackled merrily and a silver tea service awaited. Over steaming Earl Grey and delicate cucumber sandwiches, Eleanor shared the village's troubles. "It's more than festival nerves, Jane. Sir Reginald Blackwood, the squire at Blackwood Hall, plans to sell part of his estate for development. New houses, factories, who knows what. The church sits on his land, you see, and some fear he'll sell that too. The farmers and the historical society are furious. They say it'll destroy our way of life. Others see pound signs and jobs." She paused, stirring her tea. Then there's this shadow business. People claim to see a figure on the spire, and that midnight bell has everyone on edge. Reverend Hale is at his wits' end. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind already sorting the threads of this tapestry. Land disputes, she knew, could turn neighbours into enemies faster than a spilled secret at a sewing circle. She recalled a feud in St. Mary Mead over a contested orchard that had led to poisoned jam at a fete. Not fatal, thankfully, but a lesson in how deeply property stirred passions. "And what do the villagers make of this shadow?" she asked. Eleanor sighed. "Mrs. Pritchett, our resident gossip, insists it's a spirit from the church's past. Some monk, perhaps from when it was a priory. Dr. Elias Thorne, the physician, calls it nonsense. Likely boys playing pranks. But the fear is real, Jane. It's as if the spire itself is watching us." Determined to see the village for herself, Miss Marple suggested a walk. Eleanor agreed, and they set off, arm in arm, past the green where children chased a hoop and women hung laundry, their chatter pausing as the two ladies passed. The Spire's Shadow Pub, a low-beamed building with a creaking sign, was their first stop. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the clink of pint glasses. Harold Finch, the landlord, a burly man with a broom-like moustache, greeted them with a booming, "Afternoon, Lady Eleanor. Ginger beer for your guest." Miss Marple accepted, her eyes sweeping the room. At a corner table, Mrs. Agatha Pritchett held court, her pince-nez glasses glinting as she recounted her Spire sighting. "Clear as day I saw it, a cloaked figure scuttling up the stone like a spider. A curse, I tell you." Nearby, Dr. Elias Thorne, a lean man in his 40s with wire-rimmed spectacles, rolled his eyes. "Shadows and imagination, Mrs. Pritchett. The spire's old, not haunted." Miss Marple noted his calm tone, but caught the slight tightening of his jaw. Dismissive. Yes, but perhaps not entirely at ease. The pub buzzed with festival talk, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. A group of farmers in rough tweeds muttered about Sir Reginald's plans, their faces dour. "He'll pave over the fields and call it progress," one growled. At another table, a young couple, perhaps newlyweds, spoke eagerly of jobs the development might bring. Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles idle in her lap, each snippet of conversation a piece in her mental mosaic. The spire, the bell, the land sale, all were linked, she felt sure. But how, and who was bold, or desperate, enough to climb a crumbling tower in the dead of night? As they left the pub, the church loomed across the green, its spire stark against the fading light. Miss Marple paused, studying its jagged silhouette. The stonework was ancient, pocked with age, yet it stood proud, a testament to centuries of faith. But faith, she knew, could inspire both devotion and deception. "Shall we visit the church tomorrow?" she suggested to Eleanor, who nodded. "Reverend Hale might shed light on that bell." Miss Marple agreed, though she suspected the Reverend's light might be dimmer than the truth required. As they returned to the manor, the first stars appeared, and a chill wind rustled the trees, as if the spire itself were whispering a warning. Miss Marple's mind was already at work, unravelling the mystery one stitch at a time, ready to uncover what secrets St. Mary's Hollow held. Chapter 2. The Midnight Bell. The evening settled over St. Mary's Hollow like a velvet curtain, the sky bruising purple as the last light faded behind the church spire. Miss Jane Marple sat in the guest room of Hargrove Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly as she pondered the day's discoveries. The fire in the grate cast flickering shadows on the walls, mimicking the elusive figure that haunted the village's whispers. She had retired early, claiming fatigue, but her mind was far from restful. The midnight bell Lady Eleanor mentioned gnawed at her thoughts. A bell ringing without a hand to pull the ropes suggested mischief, perhaps malice. Tonight, she resolved to investigate, for Miss Marple knew that darkness often revealed what daylight concealed. Slipping into a dark woolen coat and scarf, she crept downstairs, avoiding the creaky third step she'd noted earlier. The manor was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Outside, the air was sharp with the scent of frost and wood smoke, and a thin mist curled around the hedgerows. Miss Marple moved with surprising agility for her age, her sturdy shoes muffled on the damp grass as she made her way towards St. Mary's Church. The spire loomed ahead, a black silhouette against the starry sky, its weathered stones seeming to guard secrets older than the village itself. She paused at the lich gate, her breath visible in the chill, and scanned the graveyard. No lights, no movement, only the soft hoot of an owl in the distant woods. The church door was unlocked, as was common in such trusting villages, though Miss Marple noted the foolishness of it given recent events. Inside, the nave was a cavern of shadows, the stained glass windows dull without sunlight. Her eyes adjusted to the gloom, and she moved toward the bell tower, a narrow stone staircase spiraling upward. Each step echoed faintly, and she gripped the rope handrail, her heart steady despite the eerie stillness. At the top, the bell chamber opened before her, a cramped space housing the massive bronze bell, its rope dangling like a hangman's noose. Dust motes floated in a sliver of moonlight from a high window, and Miss Marple examined the floor. No footprints, but a faint scuff mark near the rope caught her eye, as if someone had stood there recently. She was about to inspect further when a soft creak came from below, sharp in the silence. Freezing, she listened. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, climbed the stairs. Miss Marple pressed herself against the wall, her small frame hidden in the shadows of a wooden beam. A figure emerged into the bell chamber, cloaked and hooded, moving with cautious grace. The moonlight caught the glint of a metal object in their hand, a knife perhaps, or a tool. They approached the bell rope, pausing as if sensing they weren't alone. Miss Marple held her breath, her mind racing. Was this the shadow of village law, or merely a prankster caught in the act? The figure reached for the rope, but before they could pull, a sudden gust rattled the window, startling them. They spun around, hood slipping to reveal a glimpse of pale skin and dark eyes before they bolted down the stairs, their footsteps fading into the night. Miss Marple exhaled, her pulse quickening not from fear but excitement. She hadn't seen enough to identify them, but the encounter confirmed her suspicions. The spire's shadow was no ghost, but a living soul with purpose. She examined the rope, noting a faint oily residue on its fibres, machine oil perhaps, suggesting someone had tampered with the bell mechanism. Descending carefully, she returned to the nave and slipped outside, where the mist had thickened, cloaking the village in an ethereal veil. As she crossed the graveyard, a rustle in the yew trees made her pause. "Who's there?" she called softly, her voice firm but calm. No answer came, only the wind's low moan. She continued toward the manor, her mind piecing together the night's clues. The shadow's presence, the oil, the midnight bell, all pointed to deliberate interference, possibly tied to the land dispute Lady Eleanor had mentioned. But who stood to gain from such antics? Sir Reginald Blackwood, pushing his development plans, or someone opposing him, stirring fear to rally the village? Back at the manor, Miss Marple slipped into the drawing room, where a dying fire offered just enough light to jot notes in her small pocketbook. She listed the villagers she'd met: Mrs. Pritchett, with her tales of a cloaked figure; Dr. Thorne, quick to dismiss the supernatural; and Tommy Jenkins, the nervous porter, who seemed to know more than he let on. Then there was Sir Reginald, whom she hadn't yet met, but whose influence hung over the village like the spire itself. She recalled a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a ghostly light in a barn had turned out to be a smuggler's signal. Human nature, she mused, was predictable in its unpredictability. The next morning, over breakfast with Lady Eleanor, Miss Marple kept her nocturnal adventure to herself, not wishing to alarm her friend. Instead, she steered the conversation to Sir Reginald. "What sort of man is he?" she asked, buttering a scone. Eleanor sighed. "Charming when it suits him, but ruthless. He inherited Blackwood Hall young and runs it like a business, not a home. His wife Clara is quieter, Keeps to herself since their son left for London. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the detail. A family divided could breed resentment, and resentment could breed mischief. Determined to learn more, she proposed visiting Blackwood Hall under the guise of festival planning. Eleanor agreed, and they set off in a carriage, the horses' hooves clopping rhythmically. The hall was a stark contrast to the manor, cold, imposing, with tall windows like unblinking eyes. Sir Reginald greeted them, a tall man in his 50s with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Marple, a pleasure," he said, shaking her hand with calculated warmth. "Eleanor tells me you're a keen observer. Perhaps you'll approve of my plans to modernize the village." His tone was smooth, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease when she mentioned the Spire's shadow. Clara Blackwood joined them for tea, a frail woman with haunted eyes and trembling hands. She spoke little, but Miss Marple noticed her flinch when Sir Reginald boasted about the development. "Progress, ladies, is inevitable," he said, gesturing to a map on the table. "The church land will fetch a fine price." Clara excused herself abruptly, claiming a headache. Miss Marple's instincts tingled. Clara knew something, or feared something. Was it her husband's ambition, or something darker tied to the Spire? As they left the hall, Miss Marple spotted Tommy Jenkins delivering a parcel at the gate. He avoided her gaze, hurrying away with a mumbled excuse. His nervousness, she decided, warranted closer attention. Back at the manor, she resolved to attend the festival committee meeting that evening, where the village's tensions might surface. The Spire's shadow was no mere rumour. It was a clue, a thread in a tapestry of secrets she was determined to unravel. The bell's chime still echoed in her mind, urging her toward the truth hidden in St. Mary's Hollow. Chapter 3. The Festival Committee. The morning sun bathed St. Mary's Hollow in a golden glow, glinting off the dew-kissed cobblestones as villagers hurried about their tasks. The harvest festival was just days away, and the village hall, a sturdy brick building with ivy creeping up its walls, hummed with activity. Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat buttoned against the autumn chill, walked alongside Lady Eleanor toward the hall for the festival committee meeting. Her knitting bag swung gently at her side, but her mind was far from the scarves and mittens within. It was fixed on the Spire's shadow and the elusive figure she'd glimpsed in the bell tower. The committee meeting, she suspected, would be a stage where village tensions played out, revealing motives as clearly as a dropped stitch in a pattern. Inside the hall, long tables were strewn with bunting, handwritten schedules, and jars of homemade jam for the festival stalls. The air smelled of polished wood and strong tea, poured from a large urn by Mrs. Dorothy Winthrop, a plump woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense air and a penchant for organising. "Morning, Lady Eleanor, Miss Marple," she called, her voice brisk but warm. "You're just in time. We're sorting the baking contest rules." The room buzzed with a dozen villagers, some pinning up posters, others arguing over the placement of the cider tent. Miss Marple settled into a creaky chair near the back, her sharp eyes scanning the group, noting who spoke to whom and who avoided eye contact. Reverend Thomas Hale chaired the meeting, his thin frame hunched slightly as he stood at a podium, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Let's begin with the schedule," he said, his voice strained, as if the weight of recent events pressed on him. Miss Marple studied him closely. His hands trembled slightly as he shuffled papers, perhaps still rattled by the midnight bell or the village's growing unease. Beside him sat Mrs. Pritchett, her pince-nez glinting as she scribbled notes, eager to assert her influence. Dr. Elias Thorne was there too, leaning against a wall, his arms crossed and his expression one of detached amusement. Tommy Jenkins, the young porter, hovered near the door, ostensibly delivering a crate of apples but lingering longer than necessary, his eyes darting nervously. The meeting began with mundane matters, stall assignments, music selections, but tensions simmered beneath the surface. When discussion turned to the festival's opening ceremony, to be held beneath the church spire, a farmer named John Harrow stood up, his weathered face flushed. "I say we move it to the green," he growled. "That spire's bad luck now, what with the shadow and all. And if Sir Reginald sells the land, what's to stop developers tearing it down?" Murmurs rippled through the room, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Mrs. Pritchett gasped dramatically. "It's a sacred place. Moving the ceremony would be admitting defeat to whatever's haunting it." Dr. Thorne snorted softly, earning a glare from the widow. Miss Marple listened, her needles clicking softly, as the debate grew heated. A young woman, Lily Carter, who ran the village bakery, spoke up timidly. "I just want the festival to go smoothly. My shop's counting on the sales." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the dark circles under her eyes. Worry, perhaps, or sleepless nights. Lily's husband, Ben, a burly man with flour-dusted hands, put an arm around her, his jaw tight. "We're not scared of shadows," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Miss Marple wondered if their bakery's fortunes were tied to the development plans, or if something else troubled them. The conversation shifted to Sir Reginald's land sale, and the room divided like a fault line. Mrs. Winthrop, practical as ever, argued for compromise. Jobs could help the young folk stay in the village, she said. "But we must protect the church." Reverend Hale nodded weakly, but before he could respond, a new voice cut in, sharp, commanding, and unmistakably aristocratic. Sir Reginald Blackwood himself strode into the hall, his tailored suit out of place among the villagers' sturdy tweeds. "I've heard enough of this nonsense," he declared, his dark eyes sweeping the room. "The sale will go ahead. Progress waits for no one, not even ghosts." A hush fell, broken only by Mrs. Pritchett's indignant huff. Miss Marple observed Sir Reginald closely. His confidence bordered on arrogance, but there was a tightness around his mouth, a flicker of unease when the spire was mentioned. He spoke of the festival as a chance to showcase the village's potential to investors, but his words rang hollow to her ears. She recalled Clara Blackwood's trembling hands at the hall, the way she'd flinched at her husband's plans. Was Sir Reginald's bravado masking something? Guilt, fear, or a deeper scheme? And why had he come to this meeting uninvited, as if to assert control? As the discussion wound down, Miss Marple seized an opportunity. "Reverend Hale," she said, her voice gentle but clear, "might I see the church's restoration plans? I'm curious about the spire's repairs." The Reverend blinked, startled, but nodded. "Of course, Miss Marple. I'll show you after." The meeting ended in a flurry of assignments, with Mrs. Winthrop barking orders and Tommy slipping out quickly, avoiding Miss Marple's gaze. She made a mental note to speak with him later. His nervousness was becoming a pattern. Afterward, Reverend Hale led her and Eleanor to the church, a short walk across the green. The spire loomed above, its stones weathered but proud, casting a shadow that seemed to follow them. Inside, the nave was cool and quiet, the air heavy with the scent of old hymnals and wax. Hale showed them a ledger detailing the restoration, costs for scaffolding, masons' fees, and a curious entry for special equipment that caught Miss Marple's eye. "What's this?" she asked, pointing. Hale hesitated, his fingers fidgeting. "Oh, just tools for the bell tower. The mechanism's old, you see." His evasion was subtle but unmistakable, and Miss Marple filed it away. They climbed to the bell chamber, where the massive bronze bell hung silent. Miss Marple examined the rope, noting again the faint oily residue she'd seen during her midnight visit. She didn't mention her adventure, but asked, "Has anyone inspected the mechanism since the bell rang?" Hale shook his head, his face pale. "Not yet. We assumed it was a prank." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Assumptions, she knew, were the enemy of truth. She noticed a small hatch in the wall, barely visible, leading to the spire's exterior. "Does this lead to the roof?" she asked. Hale nodded. "Yes, but it's locked. Only the sexton has the key." Yet Miss Marple's keen eyes spotted fresh scratches around the lock. Someone had been there, and recently. As they descended, a sudden clang echoed from the bell tower, making Hale jump. "Just the wind," he muttered, but his hands shook. Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind was alight. The scratches, the oil, the shadow, they pointed to someone with access and intent. Was it a villager opposing the land sale, or someone closer to the church? She thought of Tommy, always nearby yet elusive, and of Sir Reginald's forceful presence. Even Lily Carter's anxious eyes lingered in her thoughts. Small businesses could falter under the weight of change. Back at the manor, as she and Eleanor sipped tea, Miss Marple jotted notes in her pocketbook. The festival committee had revealed divisions, those for progress, those against, and those caught in between. The Spire was more than a landmark. It was a battleground for the village's soul. She resolved to attend the festival's opening ceremony, where the shadow's next move might reveal itself. The truth, she knew, was like a dropped stitch. One tug, and the whole pattern would unravel. Chapter 4. The Festival's Eve. The day before the Harvest Festival dawned crisp and bright, with St. Mary's Hollow transformed into a tapestry of autumn colours. Garlands of marigolds and ivy draped the village green, where stalls stood ready with jars of golden honey, baskets of apples, and woven wreaths. The air buzzed with anticipation, carrying the scent of fresh-baked pies and the distant strum of a fiddle being tuned. Yet, as Miss Jane Marple strolled through the preparations, her keen eyes missed nothing. Not the forced smiles of some villagers, nor the way conversations hushed when certain names were mentioned. The spire of St. Mary's Church loomed over the festivities, its shadow stretching like a warning across the cobblestones, and Miss Marple sensed that tonight's eve of festival gathering might unravel more than just ribbons. She had spent the morning at Hargrove Manor, sipping tea with Lady Eleanor and reviewing her notes. The scratches on the bell tower hatch, the oily residue on the rope, and Sir Reginald's domineering presence at the committee meeting all pointed to a deliberate hand behind the spire's mysteries. But whose? Miss Marple decided to focus on the villagers she'd observed, particularly young Tommy Jenkins, whose nervous glances suggested he knew more than he let on. She also wondered about Clara Blackwood's haunted expression and Reverend Hale's evasive answers about the bell mechanism. Tonight's gathering, a traditional bonfire on the green to mark the festival's start, would bring the village together, perfect for observing alliances and enmities. By late afternoon, Miss Marple and Eleanor joined the crowd on the green, where a bonfire crackled under a sky streaked with pink and gold. Villagers mingled, their faces glowing in the firelight, while children darted about, clutching toffee apples. Mrs. Dorothy Winthrop bustled among the stalls, checking lists, while Lily and Ben Carter handed out warm scones from their bakery's booth. Miss Marple noted Lily's tense smile as she served customers, and Ben's protective hover, his eyes scanning the crowd as if expecting trouble. Nearby, Mrs. Pritchett held court with a group of older women, her voice carrying tales of the spire's shadow, now embellished with ghostly moans. Dr. Elias Thorne stood apart, sipping cider and watching the scene with a faint smirk, as if above the village's superstitions. Miss Marple settled on a bench, her knitting bag at her feet, and accepted a mug of mulled wine from Eleanor. The warmth of the drink contrasted with the chill in her thoughts as she observed Sir Reginald Blackwood making his rounds, shaking hands with calculated charm. He paused to speak with a stranger in a smart suit, a developer perhaps, judging by his polished shoes and briefcase. The sight stirred murmurs among the farmers, their faces darkening as they whispered about lost fields. Clara Blackwood stood at her husband's side, her pale face half hidden by a shawl, her eyes fixed on the ground. Miss Marple wondered what kept her so silent. Was it fear of her husband, or something deeper? As the bonfire roared higher, Reverend Hale took centre stage, raising his hands for quiet. "Friends," he began, his voice thin but earnest. "Tonight we celebrate our village's bounty and unity. Let us set aside our differences and honor the traditions that bind us." His words were met with polite applause, but Miss Marple caught the skeptical glances exchanged among the crowd. Unity, it seemed, was fragile when land and livelihoods were at stake. The Reverend led a prayer, his voice faltering as he glanced at the spire, its silhouette stark against the twilight. Miss Marple followed his gaze, noting a faint flicker of movement near the church, a trick of the light or something more. Determined to investigate, she excused herself from Eleanor, claiming a need to stretch her legs. Skirting the crowd, she moved toward the church, her steps quiet on the grass. The graveyard was deserted, its headstones silvered by moonlight, and the spire loomed closer now, its stones etched with centuries of wind and rain. As she neared the church door, she spotted Tommy Jenkins slipping out from a side gate, his cap pulled low. "Good evening, Tommy," she called softly, startling him. His eyes widened, and he clutched a small parcel to his chest. "Oh, Miss Marple, just delivering something for the vicar," he stammered, backing away. "Late for that, isn't it?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Tommy mumbled an excuse and hurried off, leaving Miss Marple to ponder the parcel's contents. Papers, perhaps, or something less innocent. Inside the church, the silence was heavy, broken only by the creak of pews settling in the cold. Miss Marple moved to the vestry, a small room cluttered with hymnals and candlesticks, where she hoped to find records of the spire's restoration. The desk was locked, but a quick search revealed a key tucked beneath a prayer book, a careless hiding place. Inside, she found invoices for scaffolding and stonework, but one document stood out. A letter from a surveyor, warning that the spire's foundation was unstable, risking collapse if not addressed. The date was recent, and a note in Reverend Hale's handwriting read, "Urgent, discuss with R.B." Miss Marple's lips pursed. R.B., Reginald Blackwood. Was the spire's condition a motive for sabotage, to hasten or halt the land sale? A sudden noise, a soft thud from the nave, made her freeze. Slipping the letter into her pocket, she crept to the door and peered out. A figure moved in the shadows near the altar, too quick to identify. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not with fear but with the thrill of the chase. She stepped forward, her voice calm. "Is someone there?" The figure vanished through a side door, leaving only the echo of footsteps. She considered pursuit but thought better of it. Her strength lay in observation, not confrontation. Instead, she examined the altar, finding a single candle knocked askew, its wax still warm. Someone had been here, and recently. Returning to the green, she rejoined Eleanor as the bonfire dwindled to embers. The crowd was thinning, but tension lingered like smoke in the air. Miss Marple spotted Lily Carter arguing quietly with Ben, her hands gesturing sharply. Dr. Thorne had vanished, and Sir Reginald was deep in conversation with the stranger, their heads bent close. Mrs. Pritchett, meanwhile, was regaling a new audience with her ghost stories, oblivious to the real drama unfolding. As Miss Marple and Eleanor walked back to the manor, the spire's shadow seemed to follow, a silent reminder of the secrets it held. In her room that night, Miss Marple added to her notes, her pen scratching softly. The surveyor's letter suggested the spire's instability was known, yet no one had acted. Was someone exploiting this to stir fear or to discredit Sir Reginald's plans? Tommy's parcel, the figure in the church, and Clara's silence all pointed to hidden motives. The festival tomorrow would bring the village together under the spire's gaze, and Miss Marple felt certain the shadow would make its next move. She closed her pocketbook, her mind already weaving the clues into a pattern, ready for the festival's dawn. Chapter 5. The Festival's Dawn. The morning of the Harvest Festival broke over St. Mary's Hollow with a blaze of autumn sunlight, painting the village in hues of amber and crimson. The green was a riot of activity. Stalls laden with pumpkins, jams and knitted scarves lined the paths. while a fiddler's tune danced through the air, mingling with laughter and the clink of cider mugs. Children darted between legs, clutching paper kites, and the scent of roasted chestnuts wafted from a brazier. Yet, as Miss Jane Marple stepped onto the green, her sensible shoes crunching on fallen leaves, she felt the undercurrent of unease that no amount of festivity could mask. The spire of St. Mary's Church loomed over the scene, its shadow slicing across the merrymaking like a blade, and Miss Marple knew today's celebration might reveal more than just the winner of the pie contest. She had risen early, her mind turning over the surveyor's letter she'd found in the vestry, with its warning of the spire's unstable foundation and Reverend Hale's note to discuss with R.B. The figure she'd glimpsed in the church last night, coupled with Tommy Jenkins's evasive behaviour, suggested someone was using the spire's troubles to stir chaos. Was it to sabotage Sir Reginald's land sale, or to hasten it? Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, and joined Lady Eleanor near a stall selling apple tarts. "Quite a turnout," Eleanor remarked, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But I can't shake the feeling something's brewing." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze already tracking the villagers she'd marked as key to the mystery. The festival opened with a speech from Reverend Hale, who stood on a makeshift stage beneath the spire, his voice trembling as he blessed the harvest. The crowd applauded, but Miss Marple noted the strained faces of some. John Harrow, the farmer, stood with arms crossed, his scowl fixed on Sir Reginald, who lingered at the edge of the stage with his developer friend. Clara Blackwood was absent, her absence conspicuous given her husband's prominence. Mrs. Dorothy Winthrop bustled about, directing volunteers while Lily and Ben Carter manned their bakery stall, their smiles tight as they handed out pastries. Miss Marple approached, complimenting Lily's scones. "You must be run off your feet," she said kindly. Lily nodded, her eyes flickering toward the church. "It's a big day for us," she murmured. But her voice held a tremor that Miss Marple filed away. As the morning unfolded, Miss Marple wandered the stalls, her unassuming presence allowing her to eavesdrop unnoticed. She overheard two farmers muttering about a petition to block Sir Reginald's sale, their voices low but fierce. "If that spire falls, it's on him," one said, and Miss Marple wondered if the Shadow's antics were meant to fuel such fears. At the cider tent, she spotted Dr. Elias Thorne, his usual smirk replaced by a furrowed brow as he spoke to a young man in workman's overalls, likely one of the spire's repair crew. Their conversation was too quiet to catch, but Thorne's sharp glance toward the church suggested he knew more than he let on. Midday brought the children's games, and Miss Marple settled on a bench to watch, her needles clicking as she observed the crowd. Tommy Jenkins appeared, carrying a crate of apples to a stall, his cap pulled low. She called him over, her tone warm. "Tommy, you're everywhere today. Have you seen anything odd near the church?" His face paled, and he shifted the crate. "Nothing, ma'am. Just busy with deliveries." He scurried off, but not before Miss Marple noticed a smudge of oil on his sleeve, similar to the residue on the bell rope. Her suspicions deepened. Tommy was involved, willingly or not. The festival paused for the baking contest, judged by Mrs. Winthrop and Reverend Hale. As pies and cakes were presented, Miss Marple slipped away, drawn to the church. The crowd's focus on the contest gave her a chance to investigate without prying eyes. Inside, the nave was cool and dim, the stained glass windows casting coloured patterns on the stone floor. She climbed to the bell tower, her steps careful on the narrow stairs. The hatch to the spire's exterior, with its scratched lock, beckoned. Kneeling, she examined it closely, finding a tiny metal shaving caught in the frame. Evidence of tampering, perhaps with a tool like a lockpick. Her heart quickened. The Shadow's access to the spire was no accident. A faint creak from below made her pause. She descended quietly, peering into the nave. A cloaked figure stood near the organ, their back to her, adjusting something on the bench. Miss Marple's breath caught. Was this the Shadow? Before she could call out, the figure turned, revealing Lily Carter's pale face. "Miss Marple," Lily gasped, clutching a hymn book. I was just tidying." Her eyes were wide and her hands trembled. "At this hour?" Miss Marple asked gently. Lily stammered. "Ben asked me to fetch something. I should go." She hurried out, leaving Miss Marple to inspect the organ. Beneath the bench, she found a small cloth bag containing a vial of oil and a slender tool. A lockpick, perhaps. Lily's presence here was no coincidence. Returning to the festival, Miss Marple rejoined Eleanor as the baking contest winners were announced. Lily's apple pie took first prize, but her smile was strained as she accepted the ribbon. Miss Marple's mind raced. Lily's nervousness, the oil, the lockpick. Did she know about the Spire's tampering? Or was she protecting someone? Ben, perhaps, with his protective demeanour. Or was Tommy, with his oily sleeve, the key? As the crowd cheered a folk dance, Miss Marple spotted Sir Reginald arguing with the developer, his gestures sharp. Clara's absence nagged at her. Why wasn't she here, supporting her husband's public display? The festival continued into the afternoon, with games and music, but Miss Marple's thoughts were on the Spire. The surveyor's letter had warned of collapse, yet the repairs seemed stalled. Was someone delaying them to scare the village, or to force Sir Reginald's hand? She decided to visit Blackwood Hall tomorrow, hoping to speak with Clara. The Spire's shadow was growing clearer, not a ghost, but a person with a purpose, and Miss Marple was determined to unmask them before the festival's end. Chapter 6. The Secrets of Blackwood Hall. The Harvest Festival's first day had drawn to a close, leaving St. Mary's Hollow bathed in the soft glow of twilight, with lanterns swaying gently in the breeze, and the faint echo of laughter lingering on the green. Miss Jane Marple, however, was far from lulled by the festive cheer. The discovery of the lockpick and oil beneath the church organ, coupled with Lily Carter's nervous behaviour and Tommy Jenkins's oily sleeve, had tightened the threads of the mystery surrounding the Spire's shadow. As she sat in her room at Hargrove Manor, her knitting needles idle for once, Miss Marple's mind turned to Clara Blackwood's conspicuous absence at the festival. A visit to Blackwood Hall, she decided, might unravel the next clue in this intricate tapestry of village secrets. The following morning, Miss Marple and Lady Eleanor set out for Blackwood Hall, the carriage wheels crunching over the gravel drive that led to the imposing estate. The hall stood stark against the autumn sky, its grey stone facade and towering chimneys exuding an air of cold authority. Unlike the warm, ivy-clad charm of Hargrove Manor, Blackwood Hall felt like a fortress, its windows dark and unwelcoming. As they approached, Miss Marple noted the neglected gardens, overgrown rose bushes and unweeded paths, suggesting a household under strain. She wondered if Clara's reticence was tied to her husband's ambitions or something more personal. Sir Reginald greeted them at the door, his polished manners barely masking a flicker of irritation. "Lady Eleanor, Miss Marple, an unexpected pleasure," he said, ushering them into a grand but chilly drawing-room. The walls were lined with portraits of stern Blackwood ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow every movement. A fire burned low, doing little to warm the room, and Miss Marple's sharp gaze caught the dust on the mantel, a sign of domestic neglect. "Clara's resting," Sir Reginald said before they could ask, his tone clipped. "She's been under the weather." Miss Marple smiled politely, noting the absence of concern in his voice. "I do hope she's better soon," she said. "Perhaps a chat would lift her spirits." Reluctantly, Sir Reginald sent a maid to fetch Clara, and while they waited, he launched into a defence of his development plans. "The village must move forward," he said, pacing before a map pinned to the wall, marked with red lines where fields would become houses. "The church land is prime real estate. A new community could thrive here." Lady Eleanor frowned, but Miss Marple listened quietly, her eyes on the map. One corner showed the church and its spire with a note in red ink: "Survey pending." Was this the unstable foundation mentioned in the letter she'd found? Before she could probe, Clara entered, her frail frame wrapped in a shawl. her eyes red-rimmed as if from crying. Clara's greeting was soft, almost inaudible, and she sat as far from her husband as the room allowed. Miss Marple, sensing her discomfort, steered the conversation to neutral ground. "The festival was lovely yesterday, Mrs. Blackwood. Your absence was felt." Clara's lips trembled, and she murmured, "I wasn't well." Sir Reginald cut in sharply. "She needs rest, not village gossip." But Miss Marple caught Clara's fleeting glance toward a side table, where a stack of letters lay half hidden under a book. One envelope bore a London postmark, and Miss Marple's curiosity stirred. Was it from their son or someone else? To ease the tension, Eleanor suggested a tour of the hall's grounds, and Sir Reginald agreed, perhaps eager to showcase his estate. As they walked through the overgrown gardens, Miss Marple lagged behind, feigning interest in a wilted flower bed. Near a crumbling stone wall, she spotted a shed, its door ajar. Peering inside, she saw tools scattered on a workbench. Hammers, chisels, and a small can of machine oil, its lid loose. The same oil, she suspected, that had marked the bell rope and Tommy's sleeve. Her heart quickened. Was someone in the household involved in the Spire's tampering? Sir Reginald's voice called her back, and she rejoined the group, her face betraying nothing. Back inside, Clara excused herself, claiming a headache. But Miss Marple noticed her pause at the side table, her fingers brushing the letters before she left. Sir Reginald, distracted by a servant reporting a delivery, didn't see. Miss Marple seized the moment to ask Eleanor about the Blackwoods' son. "Edward, wasn't it?" she said casually. Eleanor nodded. "He left for London years ago, some falling out with his father. Rarely visits." Miss Marple filed this away. A estranged son could harbour grudges, especially if the family estate was at stake. As they prepared to leave, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, her eyes catching a photograph on a sideboard. A young man in his 20s, with Clara's delicate features but Sir Reginald's stern jaw. Edward, perhaps? The frame was polished, unlike the dusty surroundings, suggesting someone, Clara, cherished it. Outside, as they climbed into the carriage, Miss Marple spotted a figure watching from an upstairs window. Clara's pale face vanished behind the curtain, and Miss Marple wondered what fears kept her so withdrawn. That afternoon, back at the manor, Miss Marple pored over her notes. The oil in the shed linked Blackwood Hall to the Spire's tampering. But who wielded the tools? Sir Reginald, to discredit opposition to his sale. Clara, driven by some hidden motive. Or someone else, like Tommy, who seemed to crisscross the village with suspicious parcels. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a gardener's shed had hidden stolen jewels. Sheds, she knew, were often repositories for more than tools. Clara's letters, too, nagged at her. Could they hold a clue to the family's secrets? Determined to learn more, Miss Marple proposed attending the festival's evening dance, where the village would gather under lanterns on the green. Eleanor agreed, sensing her friend's purpose. As they dressed for the event, Miss Marple tucked the surveyor's letter into her bag, its warning about the Spire's foundation a constant reminder of the stakes. The dance would bring key players together, Lily and Ben, Dr. Thorne, Reverend Hale, and perhaps Tommy. If the shadow struck again, Miss Marple would be watching, ready to catch the next thread in the unravelling mystery of St. Mary's Hollow. Chapter 7. The Dance. Under the stars, the evening of the Harvest Festival's grand dance draped St. Mary's Hollow in a festive glow, with lanterns strung across the village green casting a warm light over the cobblestones. The fiddlers struck up a lively reel, and villagers swirled in pairs, their laughter mingling with the scent of mulled wine and bonfire smoke. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of the green, her shawl wrapped tightly against the evening chill, her eyes sharp beneath her spectacles. The discoveries at Blackwood Hall, the can of oil in the shed, Clara's secretive glance at the letters, the photograph of a distant son, had tightened the knot of the Spire's mystery. Tonight, with the village gathered under the watchful gaze of St. Mary's Church, She sensed the shadow might make a bold move, and she was ready to catch it. Lady Eleanor stood beside her, elegant in a velvet gown, her eyes scanning the dancers. "Everyone seems in high spirits," she remarked. But Miss Marple caught the undercurrent of tension in her friend's voice. The green was crowded, yet certain faces were conspicuously absent. Clara Blackwood, for one, and Dr. Elias Thorne, whose absence surprised her given his usual knack for observing village affairs. She spotted Lily and Ben Carter near the refreshment table, serving cider with forced smiles, their glances darting toward the church spire as if it might collapse at any moment. Tommy Jenkins, meanwhile, wove through the crowd carrying a tray of mugs, his cap low and his movements hurried. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, remained still. Her hands were busy cataloguing every detail. The dance floor swelled with couples, farmers in their best shirts, young women in bright dresses, and children sneaking extra sweets from the stalls. Reverend Hale stood near the musicians, clapping along, but his smile was strained, his eyes flicking to the spire every few moments. Miss Marple followed his gaze, noting the way the lantern light played on the church's stonework, creating shadows that danced like spectres. She recalled the surveyor's letter, warning of the spire's instability, and wondered if Hale's anxiety stemmed from that knowledge or something more personal. As the music shifted to a slower waltz, Sir Reginald Blackwood appeared, striding onto the green with his usual commanding air, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. His developer friend was absent, and Miss Marple wondered if their earlier argument had soured their partnership. Seizing the moment, Miss Marple approached Lily and Ben, complimenting their cider. "Such a fine batch," she said, her tone warm. "You must be proud." Lily's smile wavered, her hands twisting a napkin. "We try our best, Miss Marple. It's been a hard year." Ben placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression guarded. "Business is tight," he said gruffly. "Festival helps, but it's not enough." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, noting the strain in their voices. Were they struggling financially, desperate enough to meddle with the Spire to sway the land sale? She made a mental note to check the bakery's ledgers if the opportunity arose. As the dance continued, Miss Marple slipped away, drawn to the church once more. The crowd's focus on the music gave her cover to investigate without drawing attention. She entered through a side door, the nave silent save for the distant hum of the festival. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of old stone and candle wax. She moved to the organ, where she'd found the lockpick and oil, and checked beneath the bench again. The cloth bag was gone, but a faint smudge of oil remained on the wood, confirming her suspicions that someone was maintaining their tools here. She climbed to the bell tower, her steps cautious on the spiral stairs, and examined the hatch to the spire's exterior. The scratches around the lock were deeper now, as if someone had forced it recently. Her fingers brushed the metal, finding it cold but slightly slick. More oil, freshly applied. A sudden clatter from below made her heart skip. She descended quickly, peering into the nave. A figure stood near the pulpit, their back to her, rifling through a stack of papers. The dim light revealed a familiar silhouette, Reverend Hale, his hands shaking as he stuffed a document into his coat. "Reverend," Miss Marple called softly, stepping forward. He spun around, his face pale, the papers slipping to the floor. "Miss Marple, I was just checking the sermon notes," he stammered, but his eyes betrayed panic. She stooped to help gather the papers, glimpsing a letterhead with Blackwood Estates before he snatched it away. "Thank you, I'll manage," he said, hurrying out. Miss Marple's mind raced. Hale's secrecy, the letter from Blackwood Estates. Was he colluding with Sir Reginald or opposing him? She returned to the green, where the dance was in full swing, and spotted Tommy Jenkins near the cider tent, whispering to a young woman in a hooded cloak. The woman turned slightly, revealing Lily Carter's face, her expression tense. They parted quickly when they saw Miss Marple, and she wondered if their conversation was about more than festival duties. Tommy's oily sleeve, Lily's presence at the organ, Were they working together, or was one manipulating the other? As the evening wound down, Sir Reginald took the stage, his voice booming over the crowd. "This festival proves our village's strength," he declared. "With progress we'll thrive." Some cheered, but others, including John Harrow, booed softly, their discontent clear. Miss Marple watched Sir Reginald closely, noting the way his eyes scanned the crowd, as if searching for someone, or avoiding them. She thought of Clara, still absent, and the London postmarked letter at Blackwood Hall. Was Edward, the estranged son, involved in the Spire's troubles, perhaps at his mother's behest? The dance ended with a final flourish of music, and villagers began to disperse, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies. Miss Marple and Eleanor walked back to the manor, the Spire's silhouette stark against the starry sky. In her room, Miss Marple added to her pocketbook Hale's hidden letter, Lily and Tommy's secretive exchange, the fresh scratches on the hatch. The Spire's shadow was no mere prank. It was a calculated act, tied to the village's future. Tomorrow's festival finale, with its ceremony beneath the spire, would be the shadow's last chance to act before the sale moved forward. Miss Marple closed her book, her resolve firm. She would be there, watching, ready to unravel the final threads of St. Mary's Hollow's mystery. Chapter 8. The Spire's Warning. The final day of the Harvest Festival dawned with a restless energy in St. Mary's Hollow, the sky a patchwork of grey clouds that cast fleeting shadows over the village green. The stalls were bustling again, with villagers bartering for preserves and trinkets, while the scent of fresh bread and mulled cider hung in the air. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, stood near the edge of the green, her eyes fixed on the spire of St. Mary's Church. The discoveries of the previous night, Reverend Hale's secretive letter from Blackwood Estates, Lily Carter's whispered exchange with Tommy Jenkins, the freshly scratched hatch in the bell tower had sharpened her focus. The festival's closing ceremony, set to take place beneath the spire, loomed as the stage for a final act in this mystery, and Miss Marple was determined to be ready. She had spent the early morning at Hargrove Manor, poring over her notes in the quiet of her room. The surveyor's warning about the spire's unstable foundation, coupled with the oil and lockpick evidence, pointed to deliberate tampering. Was it to scare the village into opposing Sir Reginald's land sale, or to ensure it went through by discrediting the church's value? Hale's panic, Lily's nervousness, and Tommy's evasiveness suggested multiple players, but Clara Blackwood's absence and the London letter nagged at her most. As she joined Lady Eleanor for breakfast, Miss Marple proposed a visit to the church before the ceremony. "I'd like to see the spire in daylight," she said, her tone casual. Eleanor, sensing her friend's purpose, agreed without question. The church was quiet when they arrived, its stone walls cool and damp from the morning mist. Reverend Hale was there, arranging hymnals, his hands still unsteady. "Miss Marple, Lady Eleanor," he greeted, his voice tight. "The ceremony's at noon. We're expecting a crowd." Miss Marple smiled, noting his glance toward the bell tower. "Might I look at the restoration plans again?" she asked. Hale hesitated, then led them to the vestry, where a ledger lay open. As he fumbled with papers, Miss Marple's eyes caught a new document, a contract draft between Blackwood Estates and a construction firm, dated just days ago. The spire was listed as pending demolition if the sale proceeded. She kept her expression neutral, but her mind raced. Hale knew more than he admitted. Leaving the vestry, Miss Marple climbed to the bell tower alone, claiming a need to admire the view. The hatch to the spire's exterior was unchanged, its scratches stark in the daylight. She examined the bell mechanism, finding a small gear slightly misaligned, as if tampered with to allow unscheduled ringing. A faint scuff on the floor, barely noticeable, suggested recent foot traffic, someone small, perhaps like Tommy or Lily. Descending, she paused at the nave's side door, where she found a discarded cigarette butt, its brand unfamiliar. In St. Mary Mead, such a clue had once led to an outsider's involvement. Was someone from beyond the village stirring trouble? Back on the green, the festival was in full swing with a tug-of-war game drawing cheers. Miss Marple spotted Lily and Ben at their stall, their faces drawn despite the crowd's enthusiasm. She approached, offering a kind word about their cider. "You've outdone yourselves," she said. Lily's smile was brittle, and Ben's eyes darted to the spire. "We just want this over," he muttered. Miss Marple noted a smudge of oil on his knuckles, faint but unmistakable. Was Ben involved, or was he covering for Lily? Nearby, Tommy Jenkins carried a stack of crates, his cap hiding his eyes. She called to him, but he pretended not to hear, hurrying away. His avoidance was now a glaring clue. As noon approached, the crowd gathered beneath the spire for the closing ceremony. Sir Reginald took the stage, his voice booming about progress and prosperity, but his words were met with mixed reactions. Cheers from some, grumbles from others. Reverend Hale followed, his blessing faltering as a sudden gust rattled the spire's weather vane, drawing gasps. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The timing felt too perfect. She slipped away, circling the church to a vantage point near the graveyard, where she could watch both the crowd and the spire. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A cloaked figure, barely visible, scaling the spire's lower stones. Her pulse quickened. This was no ghost, but a person, agile and purposeful. She moved closer, keeping to the shadows of the yew trees. The figure paused, adjusting something on the spire, a rope perhaps, or a tool. Before she could get a clearer view, a shout from the green drew her attention. John Harrow the farmer was arguing with Sir Reginald, his voice rising over the crowd. "You'll ruin us all," he bellowed, pointing at the spire. The distraction allowed the figure to vanish, slipping down the far side of the church. Miss Marple hurried back to the ceremony, her mind piecing together the clues. The figure's agility ruled out Hale or Sir Reginald, but Tommy or Lily, or even an outsider like the developer, fit the profile. As the ceremony ended, Miss Marple approached Reverend Hale, her tone gentle. "That contract in the vestry, does it involve the spire's demolition?" Hale's face drained of colour. "It's just a proposal," he stammered. "Sir Reginald insists it's for the village's good." His evasiveness confirmed her suspicions. He was entangled, willingly or not. She then sought out Lily, finding her alone behind the stall, her hands shaking as she packed crates. "Lily, dear," Miss Marple said softly, "if you're in trouble, you can tell me." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "It's nothing, Miss Marple, just tired." Her denial was fragile, and Miss Marple knew she was close to a breakthrough. As the festival wound down, Miss Marple returned to the manor with Eleanor, her mind a whirl of connections. The spire's tampering, the contract, the figure on the stones all pointed to a scheme tied to the land sale. Was Lily protecting Ben, or was Tommy acting under someone's orders? And what of Clara's silence and the London letter? Tomorrow, Miss Marple resolved to confront Tommy directly and revisit Blackwood Hall. The spire's shadow was closing in, and she was determined to expose its true face before it struck again. Chapter 9. The Confrontation at Dusk. The sun dipped low over St. Mary's Hollow, casting a fiery glow across the village as the harvest festival's final echoes faded. The green was quieter now, with stalls being dismantled and lanterns flickering out, but the air remained thick with unspoken tension. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag slung over her arm, walked purposefully toward the village outskirts, her mind a whirl of clues from the festival's climax. The cloaked figure scaling the spire, Reverend Hale's evasive answers about the Blackwood Estates contract, Lily Carter's tearful denial, and the ever-elusive Tommy Jenkins with his oily sleeve, all pointed to a conspiracy centered on the church's crumbling spire. Tonight, with dusk cloaking the village, Miss Marple aimed to confront Tommy and uncover his role in the Shadow's schemes. She had spent the afternoon at Hargrove Manor, piecing together her observations. the surveyor's letter warning of the spire's instability, the tampered bell mechanism, and the oil linking the church to Blackwood Hall's shed suggested a deliberate plot. Was it to scare villagers into supporting Sir Reginald's land sale, or to sabotage it by highlighting the spire's dangers? Lily's distress and Ben's protectiveness hinted at personal stakes, while Hale's secrecy suggested he was caught in a web not entirely of his making. But Tommy, always skulking with parcels and excuses, was the loose thread Miss Marple needed to pull. She'd learned from a passing villager that he often lingered near the old mill at dusk, and she intended to find him there. The mill, a weathered structure by the river, stood half in ruin, its wheel creaking softly in the current. As Miss Marple approached, the fading light painted the scene in shades of grey, the spire's silhouette looming in the distance like a silent judge. She spotted Tommy near the mill's entrance, his cap low, unloading a sack from a cart. "Good evening, Tommy," she called, her voice calm but firm. He froze, his eyes wide like a startled deer. "Miss Marple, I'm just finishing deliveries," he stammered, his hands fidgeting with the sack. She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You've been busy, haven't you? Delivering parcels, visiting the church at odd hours. And that oil on your sleeve, it's the same as on the bell rope, isn't it?" Tommy's face paled and he backed against the mill wall. "I don't know what you mean, ma'am," he said, but his voice cracked. Miss Marple softened her tone, sensing fear beneath his defiance. "Tommy, if you're in trouble, I can help, but you must tell me the truth. Who's been climbing the spire?" His eyes darted toward the village, then back to her, and for a moment she thought he'd bolt. Instead, he slumped, his shoulders sagging. "It's not what you think," he whispered. "I didn't want to, but they made me, said it'd save the village." Before he could elaborate, a rustle in the nearby bushes made them both turn. A figure emerged, Ben Carter, his face flushed with anger, a wrench in his hand. "Tommy, shut your mouth," he growled, advancing. Miss Marple stepped between them, her small frame surprisingly commanding. "Mr. Carter, put that down," she said sharply. "Threats won't hide the truth." Ben hesitated, his grip loosening, and Tommy seized the moment to run, disappearing into the gathering dark. Ben cursed under his breath, his eyes blazing. "You're meddling in things you don't understand, Miss Marple," he said. But his voice held a tremor of desperation. She studied him, noting the oil smudges on his hands, mirroring Tommy's. "I understand more than you think," she said. "The spire's been tampered with. Oil on the bell, scratches on the hatch. You and Lily are struggling, aren't you? Is this about the land sale, or something else?" Ben's jaw tightened, but his resolve wavered under her steady gaze. "It's not just us," he muttered. "The village is splitting apart. Someone's using the spire to scare folks, make them think it's cursed. I got pulled in, but it's gone too far." He turned away, refusing to say more, and strode off toward the village. Miss Marple stood alone by the mill, the river's murmur her only company. Ben's words confirmed a plot, but who was pulling the strings? Tommy's fear suggested coercion, and Ben's anger hinted at deeper involvement. She recalled the contract in the vestry, marked for the spire's demolition, and Clara Blackwood's haunted eyes. Was Sir Reginald orchestrating the chaos to push his sale? Or was someone, perhaps Clara or her absent son, working against him? The cigarette butt she'd found in the church, with its unfamiliar brand, nagged at her. An outsider might be involved, perhaps the developer she'd seen with Sir Reginald. Determined to press further, Miss Marple returned to the village, where the last festival stragglers were clearing the green. She sought out Lily at the bakery, finding her alone, scrubbing counters with a ferocity that spoke of more than cleaning. "Lily, dear," Miss Marple said gently, "Ben's in trouble, isn't he? And you know something about the spire." Lily's hand stilled, her eyes filling with tears. "I told him to stop," she whispered, "but he thought it would save our shop. Someone promised us money if the sale went through. We're drowning in debt, Miss Marple." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Miss Marple patted her shoulder, her mind racing. A bribe to ensure the land sale. By whom? Sir Reginald, or someone using his plans for their own ends? She thanked Lily and left, her steps leading her to the church once more. The spire loomed against the darkening sky, its shadow stretching across the graveyard. Inside, she checked the bell tower, finding a new clue. A scrap of cloth caught on the hatch, dark and finely woven, unlike the rough fabrics of the villagers. It suggested wealth, perhaps someone from Blackwood Hall, or a visitor from London. As she returned to Hargrove Manor, the village settling into an uneasy quiet, Miss Marple added to her pocketbook. Ben and Tommy were pawns, coerced into tampering with the spire, but the mastermind remained hidden. The cloth, the cigarette, the contract, all pointed to a larger scheme. Tomorrow, she would visit Blackwood Hall again, hoping to confront Clara and uncover the truth behind the London letter. The spire's shadow was closing in, and Miss Marple knew the final act was near. She closed her book, her resolve as firm as the ancient stones above, ready to unmask the figure behind St. Mary's Hollow's darkest secret. Chapter 10. The Shadow Unmasked. The final dusk of the Harvest Festival settled over St. Mary's Hollow, the village green now quiet, its stalls gone, leaving only trampled grass and the faint scent of cider lingering in the air. The spire of St. Mary's Church stood stark against a sky streaked with crimson, its shadow stretching long and ominous across the cobblestones. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag at her side, stood outside Hargrove Manor, her mind a tapestry of clues woven from the past day's discoveries. The tampered bell, the oily tools, the surveyor's warning of the spire's instability, and the confessions of Ben Carter and Lily, all pointed to a calculated plot. But the mastermind, the true shadow scaling the spire, remained elusive. Tonight, Miss Marple resolved to confront Clara Blackwood and unravel the mystery once and for all, before the village's fragile peace unravelled completely. She had spent the morning reviewing her pocketbook, the pieces falling into place like stitches in a pattern. Ben's admission of coercion, Lily's tearful confession about their debts, and Tommy Jenkins' fear all suggested they were pawns in a larger game. The scrap of fine cloth from the bell tower, the unfamiliar cigarette butt, and the London postmarked letter at Blackwood Hall pointed to someone with means and motive, possibly Clara or her estranged son, Edward. The contract for the spire's demolition, hidden in Reverend Hale's vestry, linked Sir Reginald's ambitions to the chaos, but Miss Marple suspected a deeper truth. She persuaded Lady Eleanor to arrange an urgent visit to Blackwood Hall, claiming a need to discuss festival accounts. Eleanor, sensing her friend's purpose, agreed, and they set out as the sun dipped low. Blackwood Hall loomed colder than ever, its windows dark, the air heavy with neglect. Sir Reginald greeted them with strained courtesy, his eyes narrowing as Miss Marple mentioned Clara. "She's unwell, as I've said," he snapped. But Miss Marple's gentle insistence prevailed, and he reluctantly summoned his wife. Clara appeared, her face pale, her hands clutching her shawl. The drawing room, with its dusty portraits and low fire, felt like a stage set for confrontation. Miss Marple wasted no time. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said softly, "I believe you know why the spire's shadow has haunted the village. The letter from London, the oil in your shed. Someone close to you is involved, aren't they?" Clara's eyes widened, and she sank into a chair, her shawl slipping. Sir Reginald started to protest, but Miss Marple raised a hand, her voice calm but unyielding. "Let her speak, sir. The truth will out." Clara's lips trembled, and after a long pause she whispered, "It's Edward, my son. He came back to stop his father." Her words tumbled out, a dam breaking. Edward, estranged after a bitter row over the family estate, had returned secretly from London, hiding in the village. He'd learned of Sir Reginald's plan to sell the church land, including the spire, for a massive profit, Disregarding its instability, fearing the sale would ruin the village and his inheritance, Edward devised a plan to scare the community into opposing it. He climbed the spire, Clara confessed, tears streaming. He tampered with the bell, spread rumours of a ghost. He thought fear would unite the village against Reginald. She glanced at her husband, whose face had turned ashen. I begged him to stop, but he was desperate. He used oil from our shed, tools, even paid Ben Carter to help, promising to save their bakery. Miss Marple nodded, the pieces fitting. Ben's oily hands, Tommy's deliveries of tools, Lily's distress, all stemmed from Edward's scheme. The cigarette butt, a London brand, was his careless mistake. The fine cloth torn from his cloak during a climb. Sir Reginald exploded. "Edward, that ungrateful boy! I'll have him arrested!" But Miss Marple's gaze silenced him. "And you, sir, knew the spire was unstable, didn't you? The surveyor's letter in the vestry, marked for demolition. Your silence endangered lives." Reginald's bravado crumbled, and he admitted to rushing the sale to maximize profit, bribing Reverend Hale to keep quiet about the spire's condition. Hale, caught in a moral bind, had complied, hoping the sale would fund repairs. Edward's actions, though misguided, had exposed the truth. Miss Marple turned to Clara. "Where is Edward now?" Clara hesitated, then whispered, "He's at the church, one last time. He said he'd end it tonight." Alarmed, Miss Marple urged Eleanor to fetch Constable Polk, and they hurried to St. Mary's Church. The spire loomed in the twilight, and a faint light flickered in the bell tower. Inside, they found Edward, a lean young man with his mother's eyes, rigging a rope to ring the bell one final time, a dramatic gesture to rally the village. "Edward Blackwood!" Miss Marple called, her voice cutting through the silence. "Your point is made. Come down." Startled, Edward froze, then descended, his face a mix of defiance and shame. Constable Polk arrived, but Miss Marple urged leniency. He acted to save the village, however wrongly. The real fault lies elsewhere. She turned to Sir Reginald, who had followed, his face grim. "Withdraw the sale, sir, and fund the spire's repairs. It's the least you owe." Chastened, Reginald nodded, promising to reconsider. Edward, relieved, agreed to face the consequences, while Clara wept, clutching his hand. As they left the church, the spire stood silent, its shadow no longer a threat. Miss Marple's work was done, the mystery unravelled like a finished scarf. Back at the manor, she packed her bag, ready to return to St. Mary Mead. The village would heal, she knew, its secrets laid bare. As she boarded the train, she smiled, her mind already drifting to her roses, and the next puzzle life might bring. If you've enjoyed this tale of mystery and intrigue, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, take care and keep your eyes open for the shadows in your own village.